What's up, y'all? It's Celeste. Last July, I was officially diagnosed as autistic, and this past December, I made a video talking about that. Obviously, there was a long period in between the diagnosis and that video, and now it's been another 6 months since I've been able to sit down here and make my second video in this series about my autism diagnosis and kind of how I've been processing that and everything. Hopefully, the next videos in the series are not all going to be 6 months apart, but as I mentioned in that last video, I am sort of dealing with, I am definitely dealing with autistic burnout and trying to kind of get myself out of that. So I've really been trying to focus a lot on just recovery and giving myself space and not trying to feel too obligated to do a whole lot and just resting as much as possible and that sort of thing. But this video is going to be about my evaluation process, and I did want to make this at least before the year anniversary of that evaluation. Especially before I forget everything about it. I did make some notes at the time, just kind of like about what happened during it, but obviously the longer I go on, the more I'm going to forget. From what I've gathered from hearing other people's experiences with their evaluations or assessments, whatever you want to call it, it seems like there's a lot of overlap in how different clinicians approach this, but there's also some variation. So there's not like one autism assessment that everybody goes through. So if you go through this process, then just know that there might be some differences in what it looks like for you, but this maybe will give you some idea of what it might be like. So the first thing I had to do, obviously, was find somebody to go to get assessed, and so I started looking in my area, and it took a little while to find really anybody who did adult assessments as opposed to just kids, because that's what most clinicians seem to focus on for autism. I found a few, but I ended up finding one that is about 15 minutes away from me. Her name is Dr. Stacy Carmichael at MindWorks in Winter Garden, Florida. On her website, first of all, she specifically had a listing or page about adult autism assessments. She also has an adult son herself who is autistic, and the way that she talked about him was not super ableist. And then she also talked specifically on her website about the different presentation that can happen in females who are autistic. And if you start looking into autism traits and things like that online, you're going to run into these lists of female autism traits and like the female presentation of autism, which, at least in my view, is not really, there's not really any biological basis to this. It really has nothing to do with being female or male. It's just how we're socialized, and there are just different presentations of autism also that really have nothing to do with your sex or gender. It's just there are different ways that it presents, and I think that coupled with how we're socialized can make certain traits look different in different people. So I did like that she focused on that, because I have somewhat atypical presentation, and so I wanted somebody that wasn't just going to look at like the most stereotypical, like old school kind of presentation of autism. But also she, at least in one place on her website specifically, instead of saying female, said assigned female at birth. So that was a little bit of a green flag for me. And then she also linked from her website, had a couple of YouTube videos where she had done some like webinar kind of things for other practitioners, one of which was decently long. I want to say it was like an hour or something, presentation specifically on autism in girls and women. And again, like, I'm not female, and that there's not really a female presentation of autism, but this like idea of a presentation in girls and women is not completely like what my presentation is, but there's some of it that is. And basically I just got the idea from that webinar that she likes to look at the person as a whole and not kind of jump to conclusions, and not just look at like the most blatant kind of presentation, but like is looking for more subtle cues. And so basically just based on all that, I got kind of a good sense of her and felt like she would be a good fit for me. But I still was nervous about going through the assessment process and finding out I was wrong, and then feeling like, first of all, I had spent a whole bunch of money, and then also like then I would feel kind of like invalidated and kind of feel like, well, I'm just screwed up then. There's not really any reason for me to be having all these problems and that kind of thing, which is a very common way to feel, I think, from what I've seen from other people. So before I went ahead and scheduled the assessment, I emailed her and basically just asked if there was any way that she could tell me, like, is there any like specific thing or things that like make somebody autistic that are different from any other neurotype, because there's so much overlap with other things like ADHD and gifted and like highly sensitive and sensory processing disorder and all these other things, trauma, and like just so much other stuff that overlaps so much with the list of autism traits that I was having a really hard time trying to figure out, like, how do I know if I'm autistic as opposed to like these other 5 things? So I just wanted to know, is there something that is like only autistic people are like this, or only autistic people are not like this? And basically she like replied and said, like, not really, there's not really anything like that. It's just about like the whole list of criteria and if you meet the criteria. But she very generously offered for me to go ahead and take a couple of the questionnaires that she does during the assessment for free and just like sent them to me through the email, and just had me do that. And then I submitted those back to her, and she said based on that, she recommended that I do get an assessment. But I was still nervous because I didn't want to feel like I was buying an autism diagnosis. I didn't want to just like have her be like, oh yeah, go ahead and do it, and send me the money and then we'll do it and then you'll get your diagnosis. Like, I didn't want it to be like that. I wanted to make sure that it was like legit. So I told her I needed to like figure out my finances first, and she like immediately wrote back and started like suggesting other people that I could go to as instead of her that might be cheaper. And I looked at them, but I didn't really feel like they would be a good fit. But the fact that she did that and was willing to do that, like, made me feel like she wasn't just like trying to trick me into giving her money. So, yeah. So anyway, I got a really good sense about her based on all of that, and that was why I chose her. So I went ahead and scheduled, but I did have to wait a few months for the date to be available because the assessment takes 3 hours, and then like in between she has to like write up all these reports and everything. So she only does them certain days and certain times of day, and so I had to wait. This was in April that I talked to her, and then I had to wait till July for my actual evaluation. But in the meantime, I was sent several online questionnaires to do, as well as some of the same questionnaires for Jason, who, if you don't know, is my best friend / platonic life partner, who I live with, to do about me. And then also this enormous intake questionnaire, which was, after I finished filling it out, was 12 pages long. And then I wasn't asked to do this, but just like for my own personal like organization and everything, put together a bullet list of my own traits that I felt like met the autism criteria. Basically, I have like different categories, which are social and communication differences, restricted interests, repetitive behaviors, rigidity, and sensitivity. And just like gave examples from current as well as past like childhood stuff that fit all these different categories, which like, but basically anything that I felt like might be relevant. And so I sent that to her ahead of time, but then we also went through this during the evaluation. I had seen several other people talk about like making a binder and all this stuff and like writing all this stuff up, and like I wanted to do something like that, but I knew that I would get really overwhelmed if I tried to write all of this out like long form. So I just made a bullet list, and that really worked well for me. It was great because I kind of just like started it up, and then anytime I would think of something, also like sometimes while I was watching other people's videos and stuff, I would like make notes during that and then just like add to this list anytime I thought of something. So that was the good thing about having to wait so long for the evaluation, is that like I had several months to kind of gather all this data. And also while I was doing the official intake form, I went back and pretty much tried to like gather as much as I could from any kind of documents I had, like my report cards, and also like my baby book, and like basically anything that I had from my younger years, and anything that I had like other people's like assessments or like opinions about me and my performance and my traits and everything from birth on, basically, so that I could add those into the assessment or the intake form, so that I could kind of give as much context as possible for everything, which I think is a very autistic thing to do. So the questionnaires that I did ahead of time were the Brief A, which is basically an executive functioning assessment, Adult Behavior Checklist, which is for social, emotional, and behavioral functioning, the Social Responsiveness Scale, SRS-2, which is social awareness, social cognition, social communication, social motivation, and restrictive repetitive behaviors. Yeah, those were the ones that Jason and I both did ahead of time. So when I went in for the assessment, she already had all that and had already been looking at that in the intake form and everything. So when I first got there, the first thing that I did was an IQ test, which wasn't with her, it was with somebody else. She was like getting ready for our stuff while this other person was giving me the IQ test. And it was pretty nerve-wracking. Just first of all to like be sitting there for so long and like having to answer all these questions and like knowing that I was being evaluated and knowing that I was being timed and everything was just kind of a little bit stressful. So I felt like I wasn't doing very well, but it turned out that my intelligence is superior, but my processing speed was in the average range, which, I mean, obviously average isn't bad, but there is a discrepancy there, which is kind of explains a lot about my life. So basically I'm smart but slow. So the next thing I did was an ADHD test called the TOVA test, which is basically there's a computer and you have a mouse and I'm trying to remember exactly what it is. It's something like there's a box that comes up, and if the box has a line or a dot or something, then you click, and if it doesn't, then you don't click. It's one of those kinds of things where it's like you have to be fast but also accurate, so it's measuring both and then like comparing them to each other. So it's kind of like measuring your impulsivity as well as like your ability to focus on what you're doing and that kind of thing, which like I can see how that would tie into ADHD because those are things that people with ADHD struggle with. But for me, this test wasn't really that hard. For me personally, something like that where it's like one specific task that you're doing over and over, it's very repetitive, is actually easier for me to focus on than something where I have to make a lot of decisions or like think a lot about what I'm doing. And like that's what I struggle with focus, is where there's something where there's a lot going on and I have to kind of like manage it all at once, or there's like other things going on in the background, but then I'm also having to think really hard. If I'm just doing one thing where I'm like literally just clicking a mouse, that's not really that difficult for me to focus on because all I have to do is like that one action. So I don't know, for me, like I didn't feel like it was really the best assessment of ADHD, and I'm pretty sure that I have ADHD, and she actually agreed with that in the report. So I'm not too worried about that. So then I sat back down with her and we basically went through all of the questionnaires that Jason and I had done and talked about the results of them, and kind of just like went through like what the differences were between my assessment and Jason's assessment. Then she had me do this puzzle, and I can't remember exactly what she was looking for with that. I know it wasn't like whether I could solve the puzzle. It was like she was observing me doing the puzzle and looking for something during that. I don't remember what she told me it was about. She did tell me afterward, but I can't remember what it was. Then there was this story about a frog, which I had heard about. There was something to do with a story about a frog in several other people's autism assessments. I guess this is a very common thing to do in them. There's a specific children's picture book that's used for this, and I'm not going to say too much about it because I don't want to like sway anybody in how they do this if you go through this process, but basically, when I had heard about other people talk about this, which I didn't really know what it was going to be like, but I had like this general idea that it was something to do with a story and a frog. It didn't sound like something I would struggle with, but it turned out it was like a lot harder than I thought it would be, and I actually didn't do very well on that. And then finally, we went through the rest of that intake form and also the bullet list that I had made, and just kind of talked about my whole life and my childhood, my school and work and friends and family and like relationships and all the things that I've struggled with, things that I've done well with, and the way that I've presented in different parts of my life and all kinds of stuff. Just kind of like going through all the criteria and my life basically, and just kind of comparing them. And of course, during all of this, she wasn't just evaluating what I was saying or like the answers to all of these test questions and everything. She was also evaluating the way that I was saying things, whether I was looking her in the eye, whether I was looking off to the side, which I do a lot, whether I was giving one-word answers, which I do a lot, whether I was asking her things, which I don't do a lot because I'm afraid to be rude and ask too much. Yeah, it was kind of like a meta evaluation on top of the obvious things that were being assessed in me. So I had to wait for her to actually make the full report to get the like official diagnosis, but she basically told me verbally at the end of the assessment that she was going to do that. And I only had to wait a few days for my report, which was great. I've heard from a lot of people who have to wait several weeks or even months for theirs, and so I was really pleased that mine was so fast. The full report is 13 pages long. It's actually 15, but the last couple are more like resources and like book recommendations and stuff like that. So the part about me is 13 pages, and it includes all of the questionnaires, like the inventories and stuff that that I and Jason did with like graphs and everything. I'm not going to show you too closely, but it has like graphs and stuff. So, you know, it has like the actual scales of everything. And then it has like her personal assessment of me. And like also she does talk about like how I behaved during the assessment. And yeah, so it's basically like her overall assessment of me and whether I meet the criteria, which she says that I do. So the official diagnoses that are given to me in this report, which some of them I already had, but they are autism spectrum disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, persistent depressive disorder, dysthymia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, unspecified type, and other specified trauma or stress-related disorder, which is basically, there's not actually a complex PTSD entry yet in the DSM in America. So this is like the closest that she could get to that, basically. And she basically gave this to me because of being undiagnosed autistic for 40 years and the trauma that comes with that. So that was pretty much the process. Of course, as always, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments section below. And I am hoping to make more videos about being autistic and how I'm processing that and kind of like going through my whole memory of my life and reframing everything in that context. And yeah, I'm hoping to be making some videos at some point about like traits that I do and don't have, like why I thought that I might be autistic, why I thought I might not be autistic, and what my childhood was like as an autistic person, things like that. So let me know in the comments if you have any specific things you want me to talk about, so I can kind of figure out what I'm going to do next. Again, hopefully it will not be 6 months from now, but I really don't know when it will be. Making this video was kind of difficult for me. Trying not to be rambly, but that's just how I am, at least right now. Despite the fact that, according to this IQ test, I have very high verbal intelligence. Doesn't seem to translate very well to me talking. So, yeah, I guess that's the slow processing part of it kicking in. But I'm doing my best. So, yeah, if there's anything you want me to cover on this topic, just let me know and I'll take that into consideration. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more of my future content, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.